Huascarán Avalanche. Alright, let's unravel this chilling and heartbreaking event. The 1970 Huascarán debris avalanche. A disaster so cataclysmic it literally erased a town from existence. Picture this. It's 1970 Peru. A massive 7.9 magnitude earthquake rocks the country, but the real horror? What it triggers. A massive chunk of Mount Huascarán, the highest peak in Peru, suddenly breaks loose. And we're not talking about a few rocks tumbling down. This was an earth-shattering avalanche, a monstrous wall of ice, rock, and mud hurtling down at 270 miles per hour, faster than a Formula One car. And then, devastation. The town of Yungay, home to thousands, wiped off the map in seconds. Gone. Just like that. Buried under 16 feet of debris as if it never existed. And the worst part? It was Sunday, market day, meaning the town was packed. Almost no one had a chance. What makes this even more haunting? This wasn't exactly unexpected. A similar collapse happened in 1962, and some experts warned that another, even worse event was possible. But guess what? Authorities downplayed the risks. Fear of panic, economic worries, the usual excuses. The result? One of the deadliest avalanches in recorded history. But in the midst of horror, a sliver of hope. A handful of survivors, mostly children, escaped by climbing to higher ground. And standing defiantly amid the ruins, the Christ statue, barely touched, a symbol of resilience and remembrance. The aftermath was a storm of grief, political disputes, and desperate attempts to rebuild. But the land still bears the scars, and the memories, they remain a chilling testament to nature's raw, unstoppable power. White Friday avalanches. Imagine being a soldier in the freezing Dolomites during World War I, trapped in a wooden barracks on a snow-covered mountain, surrounded by enemy fire, and then, suddenly, the mountain itself turns on you. That's what happened on December 13, 1916, in one of the deadliest natural disasters of the war, White Friday. The most devastating avalanche struck Mount Marmolada, where an entire Austro-Hungarian military barracks was obliterated by 200,000 tons of snow and ice. In mere seconds, 270 soldiers were buried alive. Their commander, Captain Rudolf Schmid, had seen the danger coming, warning his superiors that the base was a death trap. But military bureaucracy has a special talent for ignoring common sense, and his request to evacuate was denied. That morning, nature decided to settle the debate. The snow, already piled 26 to 39 feet high, collapsed under its own weight, swallowing the camp whole. Only 40 bodies were ever recovered, and that was just one avalanche. On the same day, an avalanche hit an Italian Alpini division, crushing their mountain barracks. The Italians named it La Santa Lucia Nera, Black St. Lucy's Day. By the time the snow settled, over 10,000 soldiers had died in December's relentless avalanches, making it one of the deadliest disasters in military history. But here's the sinister part. Some historians believe both sides were deliberately triggering avalanches, using artillery to send snow crashing down on their enemies. War is brutal, but when you weaponize the mountains themselves, that's a whole new level of terrifying. Blons Avalanche, January 11, 1954, started as an ordinary winter's day in Blons, a small village nestled in Austria's Great Walser Valley. But by nightfall, the mountains had turned into executioners. Two devastating avalanches, striking within just 9 hours of each other, wiped out a third of the village population, leaving 125 dead and a community in ruins. At exactly 9:36 a.m., the first avalanche came roaring down from Falkov Mountain. Within minutes, 34 people were dead, buried under a sea of snow. Desperate cries for help echoed through the valley as survivors scrambled to dig out their loved ones. Then came the unthinkable. As rescue teams, neighbors, and families braved the freezing cold to pull victims from the debris, disaster struck again. At 7 p.m., a second, even more catastrophic avalanche crashed down from Mount Calv, burying rescuers along with the newly freed survivors. The second blow killed another 22 people, wiping out families that had just escaped the first avalanche. 16 people who had been miraculously saved earlier were now lost forever. Communications were crippled. Telephone lines were down, roads were impassable, and the sheer volume of snow made traditional rescue efforts impossible. It wasn't until January 13th that Austria launched its first ever airlift rescue mission. Helicopters from Germany, Switzerland, and even the US Air Force dropped supplies, rescuers, and specially trained dogs. Survivors were trapped for up to 62 hours, clinging to life in frozen tomes of snow. By the time the snow settled, 55 houses had been destroyed, 500 cattle killed, and entire families wiped out. One survivor died from shock after realizing how long he had been buried. Another, a woman, perished from burns when an avalanche flung her into her own stove. Ranrahirca Avalanche. On January 10, 1962, a catastrophe struck the peaceful villages nestled beneath Mount Huascarán in Peru. The night began like any other, families gathering for dinner, the mountain standing tall and still. But then, a deep, gut-wrenching crack echoed through the valley. A monstrous chunk of ice, the size of 2 skyscrapers and weighing an unfathomable 6 million tons, had broken free. For those living in the Rio Santa Valley, the sound of crackling ice wasn't unusual. They knew the rule: hear the crack, get to higher ground. Typically, they had 20 to 30 minutes before disaster struck, but not this time. This avalanche was different. It roared down the mountainside at terrifying speed, covering 9.5 miles in just 7 minutes. There was no time to run, no time to react. In mere moments, entire towns, Ranrahirca, Huascarán, and several others, were buried under 40 feet of ice, mud, boulders, and broken trees. More than 4,000 people perished in the blink of an eye. Some bodies were swept over 100 miles away, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Others were never found, entombed forever beneath an icy rubble. The avalanche didn't just steal lives. It wiped out entire communities, erasing homes, livelihoods, and generations of history. To make matters worse, thousands of farm animals perished, and millions of dollars' worth of crops were lost, pushing survivors into an economic nightmare. And here's the haunting part. 8 years later, in 1970, another massive avalanche struck the same region, triggered by an earthquake. It was a chilling reminder that nature, for all its beauty, holds immense and unpredictable power. The people of Peru endured unthinkable loss, but their resilience in the face of such devastation remains a testament to the human spirit. Afghanistan avalanches. So, let's break down the 2015 Afghan avalanches. A disaster so brutal it left entire villages buried under tons of snow. Imagine this: late February, northeastern Afghanistan, and then boom, a wall of ice and rock comes crashing down, swallowing everything in its path. Panjshir province was hit the hardest, with homes, roads, and families wiped out in an instant. Now, Afghanistan is no stranger to natural disasters. Every year, about 250,000 Afghans face floods, earthquakes, and avalanches. But 2015 was different. Why? Unusually heavy snowfall after a mild winter created a ticking time bomb. The Hindu Kush and Pamir mountain ranges, with their steep slopes and deep valleys, are already prime avalanche territory. Add that extra snow, disaster was inevitable. The numbers are chilling. Over 300 people dead, hundreds injured, and thousands left homeless. The Afghan Red Crescent Society and international aid groups rushed in with helicopters, supplies, and rescue teams. But here's the harsh truth. Many survivors felt abandoned. Aid was slow, and some villages waited days for help, highlighting the brutal reality of delivering aid in such rugged terrain. And the impact? It didn't end when the snow settled. Survivors faced PTSD, food shortages, and economic devastation. Farms were destroyed, roads blocked, and entire communities left vulnerable. But here's the thing, Afghans are resilient. The disaster pushed for better avalanche preparedness, risk mapping, and local training programs. Because if there's one lesson here, it's that nature is unpredictable, but being prepared can save lives. It's a story of tragedy and survival, a stark reminder of just how powerful and unforgiving our planet can be. Wellington Avalanche. In the early hours of March 1, 1910, Mother Nature decided she had a score to settle with the tiny railroad town of Wellington, Washington. For 9 days, a blizzard bombarded the area with relentless snowfall, up to a foot per hour, burying everything in sight. 2 trains, packed with passengers and mail, were stranded at a depot trapped in a frozen nightmare. Then, the weather pulled a cruel trick. The snow stopped, but warm winds and rain swept in. As if that wasn't bad enough, a lightning strike triggered an avalanche, one of biblical proportions. A 10-foot-high wall of snow, half a mile long and a quarter-mile wide, came crashing down from Windy Mountain like an unstoppable white tsunami. The avalanche smashed into the railroad depot, sweeping both trains 150 feet down into the Tai River Valley. 96 people, passengers, crew members, and railroad workers were buried alive. Some were crushed instantly. Others suffocated beneath the weight of the snow. Only 23 people survived, dragged from the wreckage by desperate rescuers. But rescue efforts had to be abandoned because of more avalanches, and it took 21 weeks to recover the last bodies. The disaster was so horrific that Wellington tried to erase it by renaming itself Tai, but the memory of that night remained. The town was eventually abandoned, and today, the remnants of its railway and the disaster itself live on in ghostly silence along the Iron Goat Trail, a brutal reminder that when nature decides to strike, no amount of human planning stands a chance. Salang Pass Avalanche. Imagine being trapped in a tunnel deep in the Afghan mountains as tons of snow collapse around you. This was a terrifying reality for thousands on February 8, 2010, when a brutal winter storm unleashed 36 avalanches on the Salang Pass, Afghanistan's crucial route between north and south. It started with a blizzard, which forced the closure of the Salang Tunnel, a high-altitude pass through the Hindu Kush. Then, disaster struck. A chain reaction of avalanches buried 2.2 miles of roadway, trapping over 2,500 people in their vehicles. Some were crushed instantly, others suffocated, while hundreds more were left helpless, stranded in an icy tomb. The Afghan National Army scrambled to dig survivors out, sending 500 troops, bulldozers, and helicopters. Even NATO forces joined in, using Chinooks to drop food and rescue the trapped. But time was against them. The poorly ventilated tunnel turned deadly, as carbon monoxide poisoning from stalled vehicles became a silent killer. When the snow finally settled, the death toll reached 175, with countless more injured. Many vehicles had been swept off the mountainside, lost forever in the frozen abyss. The tunnel was reopened just 4 days later, but the scars of that night lingered. What made this even more tragic? Authorities had warnings. The National Meteorology Authority had forecasted heavy snowfall. The tunnel structure had already been weakened by past avalanches, yet nothing was done. No road closures, no safety measures, just a disaster waiting to happen. A chilling reminder that nature doesn't play fair, and sometimes humans don't prepare enough for when it strikes. Siachen Glacier Avalanche. On April 7, 2012, a catastrophe struck the Pakistan Army base in the Gayari sector near the Siachen Glacier. At precisely 6 a.m., a monstrous avalanche thundered down, burying 140 people, 129 soldiers, and 11 civilian contractors under a suffocating 69 feet of snow and ice. It was the deadliest avalanche in Pakistan's military history, and what followed was a harrowing battle against nature. Nestled in the treacherous Karakoram range, the Gayari base was a crucial supply hub for Pakistani forces stationed at Siachen, the world's highest battlefield. The region, a bone-chilling ice fortress, has been contested by India and Pakistan for decades. Despite the extreme conditions, bases like Gayari were considered relatively safe until that morning. Avalanches in Siachen are common, but none had ever caused devastation of this magnitude. At the break of dawn, an immense slab of ice and rock detached from the mountain, thundering down with apocalyptic force. The base, once a bustling military outpost, was obliterated in seconds, leaving no trace of the structures or the people inside. Not a single distress signal was received, just eerie, suffocating silence. The Pakistani military launched an immediate rescue operation, deploying over 150 soldiers, helicopters, sniffer dogs, and heavy machinery airlifted from Rawalpindi. But the odds were grim. The frozen debris was packed so tightly that it was almost impossible to penetrate. Days turned into weeks, hope dwindled, and by May 29th, the government officially declared all 140 victims dead. Kangitsualujwak Avalanche. New Year's Day, a time for celebration, laughter, and fresh beginnings. But in the isolated northern Quebec village of Kangitsualujwak, the clock struck 1:30 a.m., and joy turned into horror. Hundreds of residents, men, women, children, were gathered inside the school gym, exchanging warm wishes and waiting for the $1,000 door prize announcement. Then, without warning, the mountains behind them unleashed a nightmare. A 10-foot wall of snow came crashing down, tearing through the gym like an explosion. The wall disintegrated, the air filled with screaming, and in an instant, 400 to 500 people were buried or exposed to the brutal -4 degrees Fahrenheit cold and 62-mile-per-hour winds. Panic turned into action. Survivors, still in shock, grabbed whatever they could: shovels, frying pans, even their bare hands, to dig through the snow, searching for loved ones. Mary Barron, a school director, clawed through the ice to save her 3-year-old son. Others weren't so lucky. Rescuers pulled out 6 bodies, then 3 more. 5 were children. Trucks and snowmobiles had been hurled into the wreckage. Children's Christmas drawings were scattered in the snow. A community of 650, now devastated, left screaming and crying through the night. But Kangitsualujwak was no stranger to avalanches. Years before, locals warned that the school was built in a dangerous spot, just 984 feet from the base of that steep 492 feet hill. Were those warnings ignored? And did the gunfire from a New Year's celebration trigger the deadly slide? In the end, investigators searched for answers, but the village already knew one thing: their strength lay in each other. Even in the face of tragedy, they dug, they fought, they survived.